Despite the president's pursuit of a deal, this war is still ongoing, and that means that we are still spending money in the Middle East, which raises the specter once again of a potential supplemental funding request. I know that that has not yet been received, but considering you sit on the Budget Committee, I'm wondering if it is your expectation, your base case, that it will just be a simple supplemental, or ultimately if this is going to be folded into a wider budget reconciliation process.
Yeah, Kaylee, great to be with you, and Joe, thanks for having me. But yeah, great question. As we've been talking here on the Hill, it looks like the number is going to be around that $200 billion number, and there's the ability to offset that. More than likely, it probably is done through a reconciliation package. That's what I'm pushing for. That's what I'm working with colleagues on the Budget Committee to do. That would require only 51 votes in the Senate under a reconciliation process. That way we don't have to worry about what we're seeing right now with DHS not being funded because of the filibuster rule. But this is obviously a critical moment as assessments are being done. Of course, the work that our men and women did through the air and from our ships in the region did a remarkable job. And but knowing now what's happening next with a transition and who is going to transition to does make a big difference to all of us. And so we're really watching and waiting to see how President Trump and his team handle the negotiations going forward.
Mm-hmm. What are you hearing from voters in your state, Congressman? I'm looking at AAA here, $3.98 a gallon nationally. You're above $4 on average in the state of Indiana. How many weeks can people take of this?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously affects people immediately. I mean, we all kind of gauge our economic attitude by the gas pump. My boys are calling me up and saying, "Dad, gas is up because of this." But I think as I explain to people, and most people understand the threat that Iran has been for 4 decades, that this is hopefully the beginning of the end of their proxies in the Middle East and the disruptions that they cause. Of course, their ability, they have a lot of money. I mean, the oil and gas that comes out of Iran is substantial. I mean, this regime has their hands on billions and billions of dollars that they can sustain this for some time. But I think that as I was talking to a friend whose family is still in Iran, she said that many of the people that are there are hesitant to go out in the streets because of what they saw a couple of months ago with the protests, where the IRGC just simply went out and killed anywhere between 30 and 50,000 people. So they're really hopeful that somebody comes in with some sort of ability to defend them and themselves, to take out the IRGC and the regime that's there. So there's obviously still a lot of hope on both sides that the IRGC's days are numbered, that the Ayatollah, of course, the senior Ayatollah is dead, but who's in charge now still remains to be seen.
Well, as your boys call you about gas prices, I also wonder what you're hearing, Congressman, from other constituents, like those that may be in the agricultural sector, as we consider also fertilizer, the wider economic impacts of how high diesel prices specifically are when we think about goods being moved throughout the country. Whose voices on that are the loudest right now?
Yeah, well, agriculture, I mean, it has been difficult for several years now, and this does cause, of course, disruption. Most fertilizers would have been pre-purchased, or they would have had those prices locked in. Diesel prices, some may not, depending on their financial situation. But a lot of the larger operations would have a lot of that already placed for pricing. But it does have an effect. There's no doubt about it, and that's why I know President Trump is very aware of that. We have, of course, shared our concerns about a long-term conflict that would cause prices to stay up. But I think that at the same time, and the ag community has been so supportive of President Trump, but this does cause issues, especially coming off of a couple of tough years. So I know that President Trump is aware. He's already is having conversations with China. They're obviously the biggest beneficiary of the oil and gas that comes out of that particular region, along with other countries. Mm-hmm. His conversations with India are really critically important. And so I think, a month from now, a lot is going to change, as you stated earlier, that the markets seem to be reacting more positively. And I think that's just simply the instability is starting to move out of the market, and some sort of end is hopefully in sight. Obviously, if things change, the markets will go the other direction quickly.
And they will tell us loudly, I'm sure, Congressman. I have to ask you about the Department of Homeland Security. I believe we are now on day 39 of the DHS shutdown, and there was a lot of optimism yesterday about a deal. That seems to have come crashing down with Senate Democrats saying that they just haven't seen the reforms at ICE that they need to see to vote yes. This idea of siphoning off ICE funding is apparently not going to be happening and funding the rest of DHS. We talked to your colleague from Massachusetts, the Democrat, Jake Auchincloss, about the offers that have been on the table. Gave us a sense of how far apart everyone is, Congressman. Here's what he said.
It is totally unacceptable for our TSA agents to be working unpaid, and Democrats are ready to fund TSA today. Number two, the claim from the Senate Majority Leader that somehow ICE is unfunded just is not true. Last year, they put through on a party line vote $75 billion of funding for ICE over 4 years. Finally, the impediment is absolutely not Democrats' willingness to look at this deal. The impediment is that the president said that he's only willing to look at a deal if it's paired with the SAVE Act, which is a voter suppression measure.
I realize that SAVE Act might be moving to reconciliation, but so too might ICE funding, Congressman. Would you support, knowing that ICE is funding the rest of DHS and getting TSA workers paid?
Absolutely. And I think that, there's obviously the debate with the Save America Act in the Senate right now, but that does not have to be paired with funding DHS. The House of Representatives, Republican controlled and led by Speaker Mike Johnson, we send over funding for DHS alone, separate from the Save America Act. So these two could be handled separately. By conflating the conversation, it's what's confusing to people. And so I think that we have to be straight up with the American people that these can be handled separately. And we're already starting to see that the president had some success by using ICE agents out at the airports that helped get those lines through. And my suspicion is that he'll continue to do so. He's just not going to bend on some of the reforms, the so-called reforms that the Democrats want the ICE agents to be held by. And I think that the Democrats, the sooner we get an agreement made on funding DHS, then we can go back and continue to talk about the way ICE is behaving much better and much differently than what it was about 3 months ago. So I would hope that they would realize that the administration made some really critical changes to be sure that we didn't see more problems like we saw up in Minnesota.
And finally, Congressman, as the president, of course, initially wanted the Save America Act included in this push. Now there's talk of getting some of those components into future budget reconciliation. I know you're not the Senate parliamentarian, but how do you make that budgetary? What could that actually look like?
Well, with the Save America Act, you have the policy language, but then there would also be funding pieces that would go along with that. And so, I'm hopeful there's some smart attorneys over on the Senate side working for Senate Republicans that would put those pieces together. And that's oftentimes what happens, is that there's maybe enforcement dollars that is assigned to a particular policy. Maybe the policy language isn't clear, but the money would follow those particular actions if the states decided to do so. So I think there's a way to do, at least the funding portion. If the parliamentarian didn't like the policy language, I think we can still get there. But, the Senate, again, moving around the filibuster rule could pass the Save America Act as it stands by itself, as well as the DHS funding. So that's something that Senate leadership needs to realize, that that's how they're going to have to get some of these things done.